Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett had this just totally wild idea. They were pitching a scary story about a space monster, but they didn't want some guy in a goofy rubber suit. They wanted a creature that actually grows inside a person. They were totally chasing that suffocating, inescapable nightmare feeling. And they were originally kicking the whole thing around under this ridiculously goofy name, Star Beast.
Honestly, it's wild how one tiny change just makes a massive difference. Starbeast just sounded way too silly for what they were going for, so they swapped it out. Just alien. So simple, so mysterious. It perfectly nailed that haunted house in space vibe they were pitching to the executives. Just normal, exhausted workers locked in a giant metal box with something hunting them in the pitch black.
Getting a space movie greenlit back then was basically impossible. The studios thought the whole pitch was just too weird and way too expensive. But then Star Wars dropped and completely blew up. It was exactly like when the coolest kid in school gets a brand new toy and suddenly the entire playground needs one immediately. The studios were suddenly so hyped to make it, and they just needed someone to direct.
Enter Ridley Scott, who just totally trashes the clean, shiny sci-fi look everyone else was so obsessed with at the time. He wanted a dirty, grimy, hyper-industrial ship. The people inside weren't supposed to be glowing heroes. They were just ordinary, completely exhausted workers complaining about their paychecks and the awful food. And the ship itself, the Nostromo, it was built as this giant metal trap. No sleek vessel of the future here. It was dark, sweaty, constantly dripping. Being stuck in there felt a lot like being trapped inside a rusty, overheating old washing machine. Just endless grime and absolutely nowhere to run.
As for the monster, Ridley wanted something nobody had ever laid eyes on, and he ended up stumbling onto the artwork of H.R. Giger. The studio bosses were actually terrified of the art, but Ridley fought so hard for the guy. Giger physically built this thing, using real animal bones, mechanical parts, and these bizarre, twisting shapes, creating something that looked like it crawled straight out of a terrible dream.
Then, they built this massive, bizarre alien spaceship set they called the Space Jockey. It was enormous and completely dwarfed the actors. But Ridley had this amazingly sneaky trick to make it look even more gigantic on camera. He actually dressed his own kids up in tiny spacesuits and stood them right next to the set, just to completely mess with our sense of scale. Such a clever little move.
And then there's the lead character. Originally, Ripley was written as your typical macho space dude, but they did this brilliant creative pivot and completely rewrote the character for a woman. That one single choice allowed this tall, pretty unknown actress named Sigourney Weaver to step in and become an absolute legend.
Filming this wasn't exactly a fun time for the cast either. The sets were these ridiculously tight, cramped hallways, and the actors were shoved into incredibly heavy, boiling spacesuits under those blazing studio lights. They were sweating for real. Ridley actually wanted them feeling totally miserable and exhausted, so they'd act like ordinary people doing a brutal job, rather than flawless, untouchable super soldiers.
When they finally stumble on those alien eggs, they had to look totally disgustingly alive. They pulled this off using all these messy, physical, practical effects. Flashing lights, weird slime, and just bizarre organic materials catching the light. It made everything look so incredibly eerie and wet, you kind of couldn't look away, even if you wanted to. And hiding in that egg is the facehugger, just this awful little creature. And the second it violently launches onto a guy's face, it is pure, absolute shock. They managed that using really simple physical tricks and weird materials stuffed inside the prop, making the whole horrific thing feel undeniably real.
Which brings us to the chest burster. The crew's just hanging out, eating dinner. An actor starts coughing and shaking, then a fake chest violently cracks open, and this little alien bursts out, spraying fake blood everywhere. The craziest part? Ridley kept the real, gory details a total secret from the cast, so when they fell backwards screaming in horror, that was absolute unscripted terror. Once that tiny alien scurries off, they needed the big guy. They brought in Balaji Badejo, who was well over 7 feet tall, to wear this heavy, suffocating rubber suit. He moved so slowly, in this deeply unnatural, unsettling way. And Ridley deliberately kept him hidden in the deep shadows, so you only ever caught these terrifying, disconnected glimpses of him lurking around. The design itself is just pure nightmare fuel.
That extremely long head, the weird inner mouth violently snapping out, they constantly covered it in slime so it always looked drooling and alive. Combine that with the claustrophobic ship, the strobe lights, the endless vents, it gave this mechanical-looking demon basically a million places to hide in the dark.
And then comes the truly chilling twist. Ash, the science officer, turns out he's a secret robot bleeding this weird milky white fluid. And his hidden objective? Protect the alien. The crew doesn't matter. That's the exact moment these terrified workers realize the mega corporation they work for views them as entirely expendable.
Ripley suddenly realizes she's the absolute last one left. She triggers the ship's self-destruct and makes this desperate, intensely lonely sprint for a tiny lifeboat, somehow managing to grab Jonesy the cat on the way out. As she finally blasts away, she really truly believes the long nightmare is completely over. But then, that gut-wrenching final twist happens. The alien is already inside the lifeboat. It's this incredibly tense, agonizingly quiet sequence, but Ripley doesn't lose it. She just quietly slips into a spacesuit, cracks the airlock, and the rushing air just rips the monster right out into the endless void. Just a totally silent, brilliant victory.
But, filming was really only half of it. In the edit, they place these agonizingly quiet moments right up against sudden, vicious scares. And the sound design, all those weird hums and strange noises, made the ship feel like a living, breathing thing. That precise mix is what literally had people screaming and running out of theaters in a total panic. This whole vision totally broke our idea of space. It wasn't some fun, heroic adventure anymore. It was dark, lonely, and vicious. Kind of like realizing the ocean isn't just a sunny beach, but a freezing, pitch-black abyss full of teeth. And those blue-collar workers were the whole reason it felt so grounding. No super soldiers here, just regular, exhausted people having to dig deep and find this unimaginable courage just to try and survive. Ripley proved you don't need superpowers, just your brain and some serious grit when you're truly out there on your own. It still works so perfectly today because it never over-explains things. It just leaves you lingering on that quiet, unsettling thought, what else is out there, just hiding in the dark? The unknown is always the scariest monster. If you liked hanging out and diving into the shadows with me, definitely drop a like, share this around, and subscribe for more.